I analyzed the routines of 100 of the most successful artists of history when I read Daily Rituals by Mason Curry. In the process, I learned a ton about how these creatives stayed focused, creative, and routine. I hope we can use their rituals to help us in our own creative life, whether reading, writing, or learning. One fascinating thing that I noticed was the use of focus blocks in virtually all of the creative days. Instead of working all day at random times, most had a specific time frame that they liked to get their work done in. One of my favorite examples of this is Charles Darwin. Every day at 8 a.m., he would begin the first of his work periods after a short walk and a solitary breakfast. Following 90 minutes of work in his study, he would then take a smoke break until 10:30, when he would do more work until noon or a quarter after. Darwin considered this the end of his workday and would quite literally say in a satisfied voice, "I've done a good day's work." That's not what he sounded like, by the way. The thing that struck me most about Darwin's routine was using 90-minute focus blocks to get his work done. Professor of neurobiology Andrew Huberman has done much research on this front and is determined with the help of his colleagues that 90 minutes is about the longest the brain can effectively focus on a cognitively demanding task. When I read or write for 90-minute increments, I've found that it seems to hit the sweet spot. Many creatives also stress the importance of focusing on one task while simultaneously reducing distractions as much as possible while working. Somerset Maugham famously believed that it was impossible to write while looking at a view, so his desk always faced a blank wall. Doesn't sound too fun. Benjamin Franklin serves as another great example of this. He was known for outlining a scheme to achieve moral perfection through a 13-week plan. Each week was devoted to a particular virtue: temperance, cleanliness, moderation, etc. Yeah, it's still something that I'm working on. Franklin knew that if he worked on all virtues at once, he would be overwhelmed and stop entirely. So instead, he slowly worked away one virtue at a time. This idea can be applied to our own lives. For example, sitting down to read a book, I always make sure that any distracting devices are in another room and I have Do Not Disturb turned on. This keeps any text messages or other sounds from breaking me out of my state of flow. B.F. Skinner is another psychologist that took this idea to heart. He treated his daily writing sessions like a laboratory experiment, conditioning himself to write every morning with a pair of self-reinforcing behaviors. He started and stopped by the buzz of a timer, and he carefully plotted the number of hours that he wrote and the words he produced on a graph. By tracking his work time productivity, he remained focused throughout his entire session and informed himself to how he was doing on a week-to-week basis when it came to his work. Now, that may seem a little extreme, so I think it's helpful to bring up an example of what happens if you don't focus well during your creative work. Frederick Chopin famously preferred to proofread and write simultaneously. The issue was that what he conceived as a whole, he analyzed too much when wishing to write it, and his regret at not finding it again, in his opinion, clearly defined, threw him into a kind of despair. He shut himself in his room for whole days, weeping, walking, breaking his pens, repeating and altering a bar 100 times, writing and effacing it as many times. Daily Rituals also details some exciting ways that the artist stayed creative. One thing that showed up time and time again was walking to reset the brain for more creative work. Perhaps the most famous example of this was the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who is known for setting off at exactly 3:30 p.m. every single day with his classic wooden walking stick. People say that Immanuel didn't feel nearly as refreshed or ready for the next day's pursuits without this walk. But Immanuel Kant wasn't the only creative known to do this. Soren Kierkegaard wrote in the morning, set off on a long walk through Copenhagen at noon, and then returned to his writing for the rest of the day and into the evening. Ludwig van Beethoven would set out on his longest, most vigorous walk and always left with a pen and paper in hand to record any fleeting thoughts. These walks were where they had their best ideas. I use walks all the time to get more work done as well. Every time I finish a 90-minute focus block of writing or reading, I will set out on a brief 15-minute walk or a much longer one with a parent, my twin brother, or friend. I also noticed that an astounding amount of creatives use novelty to their advantage to fuel creative insight. Nicholas Baker, a famous novelist, once said that he has found with daily routines that the useful thing is to have one that feels new. You could say to yourself, from now on, I'm only gonna write on the back porch in flip-flops starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if that feels novel and fresh, it will have a placebo effect and it will help you work. He wasn't the only creative to use this to his advantage. Woody Allen found that momentary change stimulated a fresh burst of energy. If he were in one room, he would go to another room. And if he felt drained, he would go upstairs and shower or take a momentary step outside. It isn't just new environments that influence our creativity, but also regularity. For example, I have found that if I do the same task in the same room every single time, it makes it much easier to get into the zone.
Can't talk, in the zone.
Every room has a purpose. For example, the bedroom is for sleeping, the living room is for conversing, and the fireplace is for reading. By switching in between these environments whenever I lose focus in one room, I can do significantly more creative things at a time. One last thing that I noticed in daily rituals was the insane use of habits to get things done. William James, a famous philosopher, once said that the more of the details our daily life we can hand over to the effortless custody of automatism, the more our higher powers of mind will be set free to their own proper work. There is no more miserable human being than one in whom nothing is habitual but indecision, and for whom the lighting of every cigar, the drinking of every cup, the time of rising and going to bed every day, and the beginning of every bit of work are subjects of express volitional deliberation. He wasn't the only creative that thought this way. Stephen King attributes much of his insane writing productivity to the simple fact that he gets up every single morning and writes 1,000 words, no exception. He believes that, like your bedroom, your writing room should be private, a place where you go to dream. Your schedule in at about the same time every day, out when your 1,000 words are on paper or discs, exists to habituate yourself. In fact, habits are perhaps the cornerstone to what makes so many of the creatives so successful. So often when someone comes to success, we like to think of it as an overnight story. Most of the time, however, the success results from years of hard work showing up day in and day out, even when nobody is paying attention. Many believe that inspiration and motivation created the famous artists of our days. Inspiration, however, is much too fickle of a thing to rely upon. It shows up only sometimes and with no regularity. The actual creative shows up no matter what. W.H. Auden, a famous poet, took this same principle to mind in his morning routine. He rose shortly after 6 a.m. every single morning. He made coffee and settled down to work quickly, perhaps after taking a first pass at the crossword. His mind was sharpest from 7 until 11:30 a.m., and he rarely failed to take advantage of these hours. Discipline is the name of the game if you want to survive amongst the best creatives of our time. One person that took this principle to the extreme is Twyla Tharp. Tharp began each morning at 5:30 a.m., putting on her workout clothes, her leg warmers, her sweatshirt, and her hat. She walked outside her Manhattan home, hailed a taxi, and told the driver to take her to the Pumping Iron Gym at 91st Street and 1st Avenue, where she worked out for 2 hours. Interestingly, Tharp told reporters that the routine was not going to the gym every single morning. The routine was telling the taxi driver to take her to the gym on 91st Street. After saying that one sentence, she knew there was no turning back. She used automatism to get things done. While routine is fantastic for getting work done, it's also necessary to know when you should break the mold as well. Oliver Sacks, a prominent neurologist, usually stuck to a standard routine. However, on the rare occasions when he got into a creative mode, his daily structure was completely ignored, and he would write non-stop for sometimes 36 hours at a time until the burst of inspiration dissolved. I resonate with this, especially in my own creative life as well. If I read something and suddenly get an incredible urge to write, I will immediately get out my laptop or computer and sometimes complete an entire blog post right on the spot. Be sure to check out the book Daily Rituals if you want to find more insight on the best creatives of our time. Also, check out my video on building a consistent reading habit. This will teach you how to actually build the habit of reading into your day, using some of the tips from this video that the creatives use. As always, have a fantastic day, and bye-bye.